I held my daughter's hand at the altar on the most beautiful day of her life. 2 hours later, I found her on a hotel floor with 3 men on top of her. But here's what destroyed me more than the attack itself. When I looked up, my wife was standing in that doorway. And she wasn't screaming. She wasn't shocked. She was checking her watch like she was timing it. That's when I understood. The monsters who hurt my daughter weren't strangers. They were invited. And my wife had sent them the invitation. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. My name is Marcus. For 12 years, I was a United States Navy SEAL. I've been to 17 countries. I've trained for scenarios most people can't even have nightmares about. I've stared into the eyes of men who wanted to kill me, and I lived. I survived things that should have broken me permanently. But nothing prepared me for what my own family would do to me. I met Lauren in 2009 at a bar in San Diego. I was on leave, trying to be normal for 2 weeks, and she was there, blonde, sharp, laughing at something her friend said. She didn't know I was a SEAL. Didn't care. We dated for 8 months before I told her what I actually did for a living. Most women leave when they hear that. They can't handle the uncertainty, the deployments, the fact that you might not come home. Lauren said she could handle it. She said she wanted to build a life with me anyway. We got married in 2011. Jessica was born in 2000. Wait, that math doesn't work, does it? No, Jessica wasn't my biological daughter. Lauren had her from a previous relationship. But the moment I met that 3-year-old girl, she became mine. Completely. I adopted her when Jessica was 5. I taught her to ride a bike. I was at every recital, every graduation. I told her stories about being brave and strong. I promised her that nothing in this world would hurt her as long as I was alive. I meant it when I said it. I retired from the Navy in 2010. Took a job as a security consultant, less intense, more stable, home every night. We bought a house in Connecticut. Good schools. White picket fence. The full American dream. For 15 years, I wasn't Marcus the SEAL. I was Marcus the dad. Marcus the husband. Marcus the guy who coached Little League and went to PTA meetings. And I was actually happy. Then Jessica decided to get married. She was 24. Derek was a lawyer, successful, stable, good-looking in that corporate way. They met at Columbia Law School and dated for 3 years before he proposed. He seemed like the kind of man who could give Jessica the normal, safe life she deserved. I approved. More than that, I genuinely liked him. The wedding was June 15th, Riverside Hotel in Westchester. 300 guests. Jessica looked like an angel walking down the aisle. I cried. Actual tears. I was sitting in the front row next to Lauren, and when I saw my daughter in that white dress, I felt this overwhelming sense of completion. Like everything I'd worked for, all those years of building a normal life, had finally paid off. Lauren squeezed my hand during the ceremony. She whispered, "We did good, Marcus." And I believed her. I thought we actually did. The reception was perfect. Food, music, dancing. Jessica and Derek did their first dance. Then Jessica danced with me. She held onto my neck and said, "I'm so happy, Dad. I feel safe." Those exact words. I feel safe. I told her, "You always will be. I promise you." It's the promise I've regretted every single day since. Around 8:45 p.m., Jessica went to the bridal suite to change into her going-away outfit. Standard stuff. Derek was with his groomsmen. I was at the table with some of Lauren's family, having a drink. And that's when something shifted. A man I'd never seen before, dark hair, expensive suit, Russian accent when he ordered. He appeared near our table. He ordered a vodka tonic. Very specific. And then, without being obvious, he made eye contact with Lauren. Just for a second. A flash. But in that flash, there was a message. My body went cold. 15 years of being retired, and my SEAL training kicked in like I'd never left. That look, I'd seen it before. In Yemen. In Afghanistan. Between people coordinating something. A signal. A confirmation. I stood up casually. "I'm going to check on Jessica," I told Lauren. She didn't respond. She was looking at her phone. I walked toward the bridal suite hallway. No one stopped me. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet for a wedding. I could hear Jessica's suite door. It was slightly open. And I could hear men's voices. Multiple voices. Inside her room. My hand was on the doorknob when I heard her scream. Not a scream of joy. A scream of terror. I pushed the door open. There were 3 men. One was the Russian. One was Marco. I knew him from a photo in Derek's office. They were his business partner. The third man I didn't recognize. And Jessica, my little girl who I promised would always be safe. She was on the floor. Her dress was torn. Her hair was wild. She was screaming and fighting, but there were 3 of them. And in the corner of the room, watching like she was observing a business transaction, was Lauren. When our eyes met, she didn't look shocked. She didn't scream or try to help. She looked at me with this expression of cold resignation, like she'd just completed a job. That's the moment I understood. My wife hadn't been betrayed. She had been the betrayer. This wasn't random. It was planned. Everything changed in the next 6 seconds. 2 men went down. The third ran. I didn't chase him. I ran to Jessica and held her while I called 911. Police arrived. Ambulances. Hospital. Jessica was examined. Statements were taken. Both men were arrested. But here's where the system failed her. They had money. Good lawyers. By the next morning, they were out on bail. Evidence was questioned. The business partner had an alibi that was suddenly corroborated. The Russian called a lawyer and said it was consensual. Security footage was corrupted. Within 72 hours, both men were free. My daughter was destroyed. The men who destroyed her were walking around. And my wife was gone. Not physically, but she wasn't my wife anymore. She was something else. Something I didn't recognize. That night, sitting alone in my car in the hospital parking garage, I made a decision. The law had failed. The police had failed. The system had failed. I wasn't going to fail. For the first time in 15 years, I understood why I'd been trained the way I was trained. Why I'd become what I'd become. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. The morning after Jessica was admitted to the hospital, I didn't go home. I sat in the waiting room all night while she slept under sedation. Derek was with her. The nurses brought me coffee I didn't drink. Around 5 a.m., my phone rang. It was Lauren. "Where are you?" she asked. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "With Jessica," I said. "We need to talk. Come home." I hung up. But I did go home. Not because Lauren asked me to. Because I needed to search the house. Needed to find proof of what I already knew. That my wife had orchestrated the destruction of our daughter. The house was silent when I walked in. Lauren was in the kitchen, making coffee like it was a normal Saturday morning. She was wearing her yoga clothes. Her hair was blow-dried. She looked like she'd slept perfectly. "How is she?" Lauren asked, not looking at me. "Raped," I said. The word hung in the air like poison. Our daughter was raped. By men you invited. Lauren turned to face me. Her expression didn't change. "You don't know what you're talking about. I saw you in that room. I saw the look on your face. Marcus, you're traumatized. You saw something that wasn't there." I was as shocked as you were. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that for a second I wondered if I'd imagined it. But I hadn't. My training, the thing that kept me alive in combat zones, told me the truth. My wife was a skilled liar, and she'd been lying to me for a long time. "I'm going upstairs," I said. "Marcus, we need to." I didn't let her finish. I went to our bedroom and locked the door. Then I started searching. Drawers. Closet. Under the mattress. Nothing. I moved to Lauren's office, the room where she managed her business, as she called it. She was an interior designer, supposedly. Worked from home mostly. Her laptop was on the desk. I opened it. Password protected. I tried her birthday. Nothing. Jessica's birthday. Nothing. I tried combinations of dates we'd used before, anniversaries, holidays. Then I tried something else. I tried Vladimir King, a username I'd once seen on her phone years ago that I'd forgotten about. The password was Vladimir King 2024. Her email opened, and my entire world collapsed. Emails. Thousands of them. Going back 5 years. Conversations in broken English with men whose names I didn't recognize. Transfer confirmations. Wire transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Photographs. My stomach turned when I opened them. Photographs of Jessica. At school. At work. At the gym. Candid shots. Surveillance photos. One email was from 3 weeks ago. Target confirmed for June event. Payment will be transferred upon completion. Vladimir. 3 weeks ago. Lauren had known. For at least 3 weeks, she'd known this was coming. I found a folder labeled Archive. Inside were contracts. Actual contracts written in English, detailing services rendered. Dates. Names. Amounts. My wife had been taking money for years. Thousands of dollars. Tens of thousands. And looking at the dates, at the pattern of payments, it started when Jessica turned 18. My hands were shaking. I could feel the SEAL part of me waking up again, the part that knew how to compartmentalize rage and turn it into strategy. But I forced myself to stay calm, to think like an operator, to document everything. I photographed every email, every contract, every transfer record. I took pictures with my phone and sent them to an encrypted email account I'd set up years ago, just in case. Old habits from the Navy. Always have an exit strategy. Then I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Marcus? Open the door. Lauren's voice was different now. Not calm. Urgent. Desperate. She'd realized I was searching. She'd checked her laptop. I opened the door. She was standing there with something in her hand. A gun. A small 9mm that we'd kept in the nightstand for home security. You don't understand, she said. And for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of me. Fear of something else. Fear of whoever she worked for. Then explain it to me, I said. My voice was steady. I'd negotiated with terrorists before. I could negotiate with my wife. If I tell you, they'll kill me. They'll kill all of us. Who's they? The man you saw at the wedding. His name is Vladimir. He's important. Dangerous. I got involved with him 5 years ago when we were having money problems. He approached me, said I could make money easily. Just help him with information about certain targets. Information? You sold him information about Jessica. Not sold. I didn't think anything would happen. I thought he just wanted photographs, demographics, patterns. I thought he was doing corporate espionage or something. I didn't know. Her voice broke. She was crying now. I didn't know what he wanted until 2 weeks ago when he told me about the wedding. And you let him do it anyway. I told him no. I begged him not to. But he said it was a message. That he needed to send a message to someone. That Jessica wasn't the real target. I felt my blood go cold. What do you mean, not the real target? Lauren lowered the gun slightly. Her hands were shaking worse than mine. He said it was about you, Marcus. That you once did something to him. 15 years ago. And he's been waiting for the right moment to make you pay. The room started to spin. 15 years. That was when I left the Navy. That was when I thought I'd left all of that behind. What did I do to him? I asked, but I already knew. There were a lot of men I'd heard in the Navy. A lot of enemies I'd made. I don't know his real name. He just said you'd know when the time came. That he wanted you to suffer the way he suffered. I looked at my wife, this woman I'd loved, trusted, built a life with, and I realized she was just a pawn. She'd been played. But that didn't matter. She'd still made the choice. She'd still taken the money. She'd still let our daughter be destroyed. Give me the gun, I said. She held it out. I took it and removed the bullets. Then I called the police. Lauren was arrested that morning. 2 detectives came to the house with a warrant. They took her laptop, her phone, her files. She didn't resist. She sat on the couch in handcuffs and looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Pathetic. But I felt nothing. No pity. No regret. She'd made her choices. The detective assigned to the case was a woman named Carla Henderson. 23 years on the force. Sharp eyes. She came to the house after they took Lauren away. Your wife's already talking, she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. She's given us access to her email accounts, wire transfers, everything. She's terrified of this Vladimir character. Says he's connected to Russian organized crime. Brighton Beach operations primarily, but he's mobile. International. Did she give you his real name? She didn't have it. Only Vladimir. She says he approached her through an intermediary. She never met him in person until the wedding. I nodded. This was standard. Compartmentalization. Keep operatives isolated so they can't compromise the network. I'd done the same thing in the Navy when managing informants. There's something else, Henderson said. She pulled out a folder. Inside were photographs. Not the surveillance photos of Jessica. These were older. Military era. Your wife mentioned you might recognize him. We ran facial recognition on security footage from the wedding. Got a partial match to someone in a 2008 Army database. She showed me a photograph. A man in military uniform. Young. Maybe 25. Dark hair. Cold eyes. I didn't recognize him at first. But then Henderson showed me another image. The wedding footage, enhanced. The Russian in a suit. Same face. 15 years older. But same face. And then something clicked. I knew exactly who he was. His name was Dmitry Volkov. In 2008, he was a Russian army intelligence officer stationed in Kabul. I'd interrogated him. He was supplying the Taliban with weapons and intelligence. My team had been ordered to extract information from him. We did. Rough extraction. He'd been alive when we left him. But barely. You know him, Henderson said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, I said quietly. I know him. Want to tell me what happened? I did. Not everything. Some things from my SEAL days stay classified. But enough. I told her about the mission. About Volkov being a target. About the interrogation. I didn't tell her about the methods. I didn't need to. So he's been hunting you for 15 years, Henderson said. Looks like it. And he used your daughter as the weapon. I nodded. My jaw was tight. I could feel the old training kicking in. The compartmentalization, the strategic thinking. Dmitry had planned this perfectly. He'd had years to orchestrate it. He'd gotten close to me through Lauren. He'd studied Jessica. He'd waited for the perfect moment. And then he'd struck. But he'd made a mistake. He'd let me live. He'd let me find Jessica. He'd let me discover the truth. That was going to cost him everything. We're putting out feelers, Henderson said. Coordinating with federal agencies. Immigration's checking ports and airports. But between you and me, Marcus, if this guy's as connected as your wife says, he's probably long gone by now. Back to Russia. We might not be able to touch him. That's not your job, I said. Henderson looked at me carefully. What do you mean? You do your job. The legal system does its job. I'll do mine. Marcus, if you're thinking about, I'm not thinking about anything. I'm going to work with you. Help however I can. But I won't lie to you. If this goes to trial and he walks free like the other two did, there will be consequences. That's a threat. No, it's a fact. Henderson closed her folder. She knew what I was saying. She'd probably heard it before from other fathers, other men whose families had been destroyed by the system. But she also knew there wasn't much she could do about it. She could warn me. She could tell me not to do anything illegal. But we both knew how these things ended. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a ghost in my own life. Jessica was released from the hospital. Derek moved her to his parents' house upstate. I visited twice. She couldn't look at me. Not because she blamed me, but because looking at me reminded her of what happened. The trauma was too fresh. Too raw. Derek was different with me. Cooler. I didn't blame him. His fiancée had been assaulted by his own business partner. His world had imploded too. I spent my days with Henderson, reviewing evidence, going through Lauren's financial records, learning about the network of people involved. Marco had fled the country. Federal agents found his passport used at JFK 3 days after the wedding, flight to Moscow. The Russian had disappeared. No credit card usage. No phone records. Nothing. But I had something the police didn't have. I had 15 years of military contacts still active. SEAL buddies who owed me favors. Intelligence analysts who still had access to classified databases. Former operators who understood that the legal system sometimes needed a push. I started making calls. By week 4, I had names. Addresses. Patterns. I learned that Dmitry wasn't in Russia. He was in New York. Brighton Beach, specifically. He was operating out of a nightclub called the Kremlin. He had protection, local organized crime connections. He had money. He had reach. But he didn't have what I had. He didn't have 15 years of experience hunting men in the dark. I was sitting in my car outside the Kremlin one night, watching people come and go, when my phone rang. It was Jessica. Dad. Her voice was small, fragile. Hey, sweetheart. How are you? I want him to hurt the way I hurt, she said. I want him to suffer. And I know that's not what I'm supposed to say in therapy. I know I'm supposed to forgive and heal. But I don't want to. I want him to burn. I listened to my daughter's pain, and something in me shifted. This wasn't about the law anymore. This wasn't about justice through the courts. This was about what she deserved. What we both deserved. He will, I told her. I promise you. He will. And I meant it. The first break came on a Tuesday morning when Detective Henderson called. She'd gotten a warrant to monitor Lauren's phone while she was in custody. One of the calls she'd made before her arrest had been to a number in Brighton Beach. They'd traced it back to a shell company that owned the Kremlin nightclub. We're building a case, Henderson said. But it's slow. We need more evidence. Financial trails. Recorded conversations. Right now, it's circumstantial. I understood. The legal system moved like a glacier. Slow. Methodical. But it couldn't move fast enough for what was coming. That same week, I hired a private investigator named Thomas Blake. Ex-FBI. Solid reputation. I told him I wanted everything on Dmitry Volkov. His movements. His associates. His routines. His vulnerabilities. Blake worked fast. By Friday, he'd compiled a file that was thicker than anything the police had. Dmitry ran his operation like a military commander, disciplined, strategic, predictable. He arrived at the Kremlin every night at 10 p.m., left at 2 a.m., had a security detail of 4 men, lived in a penthouse apartment in a high-rise overlooking the ocean. He had a girlfriend, a woman named Ivy, 22 years old, dancer at the club. The girlfriend was the angle I needed. I had Blake get me her address, her routine, her vulnerabilities. She lived alone in a small apartment 3 blocks from the Kremlin. She worked nights. She had a cocaine habit that was becoming a problem. She was broke despite Dmitry's money. Most addicts were. She was desperate. People who were desperate made mistakes. I arranged to meet her at a coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment. I told Blake to set it up. Anonymous message, mention of money, promise of easy work. Blake was good at these things. He knew how to make the bait irresistible. Ivy showed up alone. Thin. Nervous. Her eyes were the eyes of someone who'd been used up by the industry and was still trying to climb back. She ordered coffee and sat across from me, not knowing who I was. You Blake's friend? She asked. Something like that, I said. I'm interested in information about someone you know. Someone named Dmitry. Her entire body went rigid. No, I'm not doing this. She stood to leave. I reached out and gently grabbed her wrist. Not hard, not threatening, but firm. Sit down, I said quietly. I'm not the police. I'm not connected to any organization. I'm just a father. And I need to know about the man who destroyed my daughter's life. Something in my voice, maybe the genuine pain, made her pause. She sat back down slowly. What do you want to know? She whispered. Everything. Ivy talked for 2 hours. She told me about Dmitry's operation, how he ran women, how he had connections to organized crime syndicates across the East Coast, how he'd been planning something big for months, how he'd been obsessed with a specific target, a man he said had hurt him a long time ago, how the wedding attack had been personal, a message. He said it would bring the man out of hiding, Ivy said. He said once the man knew what happened, he'd react. And then Dmitry would know where to find him. I realized then that Dmitry wasn't done. The attack on Jessica had been just the first move. He was hunting me, using my daughter as bait to draw me out. Does he know your name? I asked Ivy. No, I'm just someone he uses. I need you to do something for me. No way. If he found out I talked to you, he won't find out. I need you to record a conversation with him. Nothing complicated. Just get him talking about why he came to America, why he was in New York. I need his voice, his confession. That's insane. He'll kill me. I pulled out an envelope. Inside was $30,000 in cash. I'd withdrawn it that morning. This is for you. And when this is over, when he's in prison, I'll make sure you get another 100,000. Enough to leave this life. Get clean. Start over. Ivy stared at the money. Her hands were shaking. I could see the war happening inside her. Fear versus desperation. Desperation won. Okay, she said. Okay, I'll do it. Blake provided her with a micro-recorder disguised as a phone charger. Simple technology. Impossible to detect if you weren't looking for it. We practiced the conversation. I told her what to ask, how to keep him talking. She was terrified, but she was also going to survive this. And that mattered to her more than her fear. 3 nights later, Ivy wore the recorder to the Kremlin. She sat with Dmitri in his private booth. She flirted. She asked him about his past. She got him drunk on expensive vodka. And he talked. He told her about Afghanistan. About the American soldiers who'd interrogated him. About the man he'd sworn to find and destroy. About how he'd finally located that man. Retired in Connecticut. Married. Living like a hero. About how beautiful it was going to be when he made that man suffer. He described, in detail, what his men had done to Jessica. He laughed when he told it. He said it was just the beginning. He said he was going to break Marcus. That was the name he used, my name. He was going to break me so completely that I'd wish I'd died in that interrogation room 15 years ago. Blake got the recording that night. I listened to it in my car, parked outside the Kremlin, and felt something cold settle into my chest. This was beyond justice now. This was a man who decided that my family was his property, that my daughter was his weapon, that I owed him a debt in blood. The recording was admissible in court. It was a confession. Combined with Lauren's testimony and the financial records, it was enough to prosecute. Henderson was thrilled when I gave it to her, though she didn't ask how I'd obtained it. This is it, she said. This is what we needed. I can move on this. Arrest warrant should come through by Monday. But I knew something the detective didn't know. I knew that Dmitri wouldn't go quietly. I knew that he had resources and connections. I knew that the legal system would be a battlefield, and my family would be dragged through it all over again. I knew that if I wanted real justice, the kind that healed instead of just punished, I was going to have to take it myself. That night, I made preparations. I cleaned out my safety deposit box, retrieved documents and credentials from my Navy days that I'd never thought I'd use again. I called 3 men I'd served with, men I trusted with my life. I told them I needed them for one final operation. They didn't ask questions. They never did. The arrest warrant for Dmitri was issued on Monday morning. He was taken into custody at the Kremlin during his usual 10 p.m. arrival. Federal agents, not local police, handled the arrest. Henderson had coordinated with the FBI because of the interstate organized crime connections. Dmitri didn't resist. He smiled when they cuffed him, like he'd expected it all along. At the precinct, he asked for a lawyer immediately. A man named Julian Kress showed up within an hour. Expensive suit, expensive haircut, the kind of attorney that organized crime kept on retainer. They put Dmitri in an interrogation room, and Henderson tried to break him with the recording. Dmitri listened to his own voice confessing, and he didn't flinch once. "That's me talking," he said through his lawyer. "So what? A man talks. That's not a crime. You confessed to orchestrating a sexual assault," Henderson said. "I confessed to nothing. I told a story to a woman in a bar. Fantasy. Boasting. It means nothing without corroboration." And he was right. Without additional evidence placing him at the scene, without witnesses who would testify, it was just a recording. His lawyer would argue entrapment, would argue that Ivy had been coached, would argue that the recording violated his privacy rights because it was obtained without his knowledge. I watched from the observation room, and I realized what Dmitri already knew. The legal system was a game, and he'd played it before. That's when everything changed. Henderson's phone rang. She stepped out of the interrogation room and answered it. I watched her face go pale, then angry, then defeated. "What happened?" I asked when she came into the observation room. "Marco," she said, "your wife's business partner. He just turned himself in at an airport in Miami. He's cooperating. Full immunity from prosecution in exchange for testimony. That's good news. It would be, except he just gave us information that changes everything. Henderson sat down heavily. Marcus, your wife wasn't just taking money from Dimitri for information about Jessica. She was taking money for something else. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean? She was part of the planning. Not just passive knowledge. Active participation. She chose the date. She chose the location. She coordinated with Marco to ensure he'd be there to help with the assault. She was paid $50,000 for her involvement. The room started to spin. I'd known Lauren was complicit. I'd known she'd taken money. But this was something different. This was premeditation. This was conspiracy. There's more, Henderson said. Marco says that Dimitri told him the target was never really Jessica. That Jessica was always going to be collateral damage. That the real target was you. That he wanted to break you before he killed you. I looked through the glass at Dimitri sitting in the interrogation room with his lawyer, and our eyes met. He smiled. That same cold smile he'd given when they arrested him. He'd known this would happen. He'd wanted Marco to turn. He'd wanted me to know that my wife had betrayed me in the deepest way possible. He'd wanted me to understand that everyone I loved had been corrupted by his operation. It was psychological warfare. And it was working. That night, I went to see Lauren in county jail. She was held without bail because of the severity of the charges. She looked smaller behind the glass, in her orange jumpsuit. Broken. But when she saw me, something in her shifted. Shame. Recognition of what she'd done. I didn't want to do it, she said before I could speak. Marcus, I swear to God, I didn't want to. But he had leverage on me. He had pictures of me with money he'd given me. He threatened to show you. He threatened to hurt Jessica himself if I didn't cooperate with the plan. I was trying to protect her. By letting them rape her? My voice was flat. Empty. No. I thought he meant he'd hurt her in some other way. Like kidnapping or blackmail. I didn't think he meant. I didn't understand what he actually wanted until it was too late. I believed her. And that was the worst part. I believed that she genuinely thought she was protecting Jessica. That she'd been manipulated and threatened and coerced into becoming a participant in the destruction of our family. But belief didn't matter. Choice mattered. She'd still made the choice, even if that choice had been made under duress. What happens to me? She asked. You face trial. You cooperate fully, and maybe the judge takes that into account at sentencing. Maybe you get 5 to 10 instead of 15 to 20. I don't know. Marcus, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I stood up to leave. There was nothing else to say. Wait, she said. There's something else you need to know. Something Marco didn't tell the police because he doesn't know. I sat back down. Dimitri has people inside the police department. Inside the DA's office. I don't know names, but he mentioned it to Marco once. He said the system was rigged in his favor. That even if he went to trial, he had insurance. My blood went cold. How many people? I don't know. At least 2 or 3. Maybe more. This changed everything. This meant the case against Dimitri could disappear. Evidence could vanish. Witnesses could recant. The legal system, the one thing I'd been relying on to deliver justice, could be compromised from the inside. I left the jail without saying goodbye to Lauren. For the next week, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I started operating. Not as Marcus the father. Not as Marcus the consultant. As Marcus the SEAL. I had Blake investigate the police department and the DA's office. Look for financial irregularities. Look for connections to Brighton Beach. Look for men whose lifestyles didn't match their salaries. Blake was thorough. By Friday, he had 3 names. A detective named Kevin. A prosecutor named Anthony. And a judge named Oliver Hartwell. All 3 had recent large deposits. All 3 had connections to shell companies that traced back to Russian organized crime. I had the evidence. But I couldn't go to Henderson with it. If she was clean, she'd have to follow protocol. She'd have to arrest them through proper channels. They'd lawyer up. They'd destroy evidence. They'd claim entrapment. Dimitri would walk. So I made a decision. I was going to handle this the way I'd been trained to handle it. Outside the system. Outside the law. in the darkness where men like Dmitri operated. I called my 3 former SEAL brothers. It's time, I told them. We're going operational. My 3 former SEAL brothers arrived in New York on a Friday. Logan, Tyler, and Blake, not the private investigator Blake, a different one. These men had been with me in Yemen, Afghanistan, and places I still couldn't talk about. They'd seen me at my worst. They'd saved my life. And they'd never forgotten what Dmitry Volkov had done to me 15 years ago. We met in a safe house in Queens, an apartment Blake the SEAL had connections to. No names. No digital footprint. I laid everything out for them. The recording. The corruption. The compromise in the system. The fact that Jessica was still broken and that Dmitry was still breathing. He's going to walk, I said. Unless we make sure he doesn't. Logan, the oldest of us, with gray starting to show at his temples, looked at me for a long time. You understand what you're asking? Yeah, I do. Because once we cross this line, there's no coming back. We're not soldiers anymore, Marcus. We're criminals. I know. Tyler spoke next. Jessica, how is she really? Destroyed. In therapy. Can barely leave the house. Derek's trying to help, but nothing works. She asked me to make him suffer. To make him burn. So we burn him, Tyler said simply. That's what I loved about these men. No lectures. No moral ambiguity. They understood that sometimes the system failed, and that failure had to be corrected. Over the next 3 days, we planned. We had extensive files on Dmitry's operation, his routines, his security, his weaknesses. We also had something else. We had a connection that traced Dmitry back to his real past, something the FBI hadn't discovered yet. Blake the SEAL had a contact in Moscow, a former FSB officer who owed him a favor. That contact sent us information that changed everything. Dmitry Volkov wasn't just a Russian army intelligence officer. He was the son of Alexei Volkov, a KGB general who died in prison in 2010 under suspicious circumstances. Alexei had been investigating American military operations in Afghanistan. He'd been gathering intelligence on SEAL teams specifically. He'd had a file on my unit. When we'd interrogated Dmitry in 2008, we'd actually been interrogating the wrong man. We'd thought he was just another intelligence officer. But he was intelligence royalty, and his father had been executed, not by us, but by his own government, for failing to produce actionable intelligence on American special operations. Dmitry had blamed me, blamed my unit, blamed America. For 15 years, he'd been planning this. Not just to hurt me, to humiliate me, to make me understand that I couldn't escape my past. The recording we had, the one he'd made with Ivy, it was him finally breaking his silence about why. He'd confessed everything to her because he thought he was untouchable, because he had judges and prosecutors in his pocket, because he believed the system would protect him. He'd made a critical mistake. He'd underestimated the reach of a man he'd wronged. There's another layer, Logan said, showing me satellite imagery of the Kremlin. He's not just running women and drugs. He's running weapons. We have intelligence from NSA contacts suggesting he's been selling military-grade equipment to hostile actors. This goes beyond organized crime. This is national security. So we bring it to the FBI, I said. FBI's compromised at the local level. We need to go federal. But we need to do it carefully. We need evidence they can't ignore. Evidence that comes from somewhere they can't trace back to us. That's when I understood what we were going to do. We were going to burn Dmitry's entire operation from the inside. Not through violence. Through exposure. Through making the corruption so obvious that the entire system would have to respond. We needed access to his financial records. His communications. His inventory. Everything that connected him to the compromised officials and to the weapons trafficking. And we needed it in a way that couldn't be challenged as illegally obtained. Logan had a contact, a woman named Jocelyn who worked in financial crimes for the IRS. She owed Logan her life from an operation in 2015. We met her in a diner in Manhattan. We didn't tell her everything. We just told her that we suspected a major criminal organization was moving money through shell companies and that we had evidence of corruption inside NYPD. That's a federal matter, Jocelyn said carefully. If you have evidence, you should bring it to the FBI. The FBI has compromised officers, Logan said. We're trying to figure out how deep it goes. Jocelyn was quiet for a long time. Then she said, if you had financial documentation, real documentation that I could claim came from a routine audit, I could investigate. I could bring in people from outside the local office. People without compromises. We'll have documentation, Logan said. That's when I realized what we were actually doing. We weren't operating outside the law. We were operating inside it, using systems designed to catch criminals to finally catch this one. It was genius. It was legal. And it was going to work. Tyler broke into Dimitri's penthouse that night. Not to steal. To install high-end surveillance equipment that would record every conversation, every transaction, every moment of the operation for the next 2 weeks. When we had everything, all the recordings, all the communications, all the evidence of weapons trafficking and corruption, we handed it over to Jocelyn. She filed complaints with the IRS, the FBI, and the Department of Justice. She did it through proper channels. She used proper procedures. But she also flagged it as potentially compromised locally, which meant it went directly to federal oversight. Within 72 hours, federal agents from Washington descended on New York. Not the local FBI. Federal agents. They arrested Kevin, Anthony, and Judge Hartwell. They seized the Kremlin's records. And they arrested Dimitri again, this time on federal charges. Weapons trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy, racketeering. The recording he'd made with Ivy, the one he'd been so confident would mean nothing, suddenly became crucial evidence in a much larger case. I watched the news report of his arrest from the safe house, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 15 years. Peace. Not because Dimitri was arrested, but because I'd finally figured out how to fight him on a battlefield where I actually had the advantage. The field of systems, of intelligence, of thinking 3 moves ahead. He'd forgotten who I really was. I wasn't just a father protecting his daughter. I was a trained operative who'd spent 15 years learning how to blend into civilian life. And I was about to teach him exactly what that meant. Dimitri's federal trial was scheduled for 4 months out. He was held in a federal detention center in Manhattan, awaiting trial on charges that carried a minimum 15-year sentence. His expensive lawyer, Julian Kress, was still working the case, but even Kress seemed to understand that this was different. Federal charges meant federal prosecutors, federal judges, federal prisons. But Dimitri still had reach. Even in detention, he had people on the outside, and he still believed he could win. I knew better. 2 weeks after his arrest, I got a message through Blake the SEAL's contact in Moscow. It was a voice message, distorted, sent through encrypted channels. Dimitri's voice. Tell Marcus I'm coming for him. Tell him they can hold me, but I have brothers. I have family. And when I get out, and I will get out, I'm going to finish what I started. His daughter will burn. His legacy will burn. Everything he loves will become ash. He was threatening me from inside a federal detention facility, which meant he had corrupted contacts even inside the prison system. I played the message for Logan, Tyler, and Blake. He's trying to provoke you, Logan said. Get you to do something stupid, something that compromises the case. I know. So what's the move? I thought about it for a long time. Then I made a decision that would have gotten me court-martialed if I'd been active duty. I was going to infiltrate his operation, not from the outside, from the inside, in the federal detention center where he was being held. I had Blake the SEAL make contact with a man named Preston, an ex-con who'd served time in federal facilities and had connections on the inside. Preston owed Blake a favor from years back. We explained what we needed, someone to get me inside the facility as a prisoner. It would take real crime, something that would stand up to scrutiny. Something that would get me arrested and detained long enough to have access to Dimitri. Preston arranged it perfectly. I was arrested for identity theft, forged documents, federal crime. I confessed immediately, waived trial, accepted a 6-month sentence. The arrest went on my record. The conviction was real. I was processed through the federal system like any other criminal. 3 weeks later, I was in the same facility as Dmitri. It took another week for us to make contact in the yard. I didn't approach him directly. I let him approach me. He had sources that told him who the new inmates were, and apparently someone on the inside had given him information about me. He walked up to me while I was sitting alone on a bench, and he smiled like we were old friends reuniting. "Marcus," he said, sitting next to me. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Couldn't stay away," I said. "Wanted to see how you were holding up." "I'm holding up fine. I'll be out soon. My lawyer has appeals prepared. We have people working on getting the case dismissed on procedural grounds." "That's not going to happen." Dmitri leaned closer. "You know why I did it? Why I targeted your daughter?" "Yeah, your father." He flinched, just slightly, but enough that I knew I was right. "My father was a great man," Dmitri said quietly. "He was working on something important, something that could have changed the balance of power in the Middle East. And your government murdered him, executed him in a prison because he knew too much. Your father was executed by his own government, the FSB, for treason, because of American pressure, because of men like you." I understood then what Dmitri had been seeking all along. Not just revenge, validation. He wanted me to confirm that his father's death was connected to me, to my operations, to my presence in his life. He wanted to believe that his pain mattered, that his suffering had been caused by something real rather than the random brutality of his own government. "Your father was a spy," I said. "And spies die. That's the business. It's not personal." "It was personal to me. Then you should have come after me. Not after Jessica. She was innocent." Dimitri's face hardened. "You don't understand. I needed you to understand what it feels like to lose everything. To have someone you love destroyed by forces you can't control. I understand perfectly. That's why I'm going to make sure you spend the next 20 years in a cell thinking about what you did to her. And every single day, you're going to know that your operation fell because you underestimated a man you thought you'd already broken." I stood up to leave, but Dmitri grabbed my arm. "There's something you should know," he said. "Something your daughter should know. The men who did it, the ones who are out on bail, they're going to disappear. I have arrangements. They're going to flee to Russia. And there's nothing you or the police can do about it." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled. "Yeah, about that," I said. "The men who participated in the assault, their names are already on Interpol's watch list. International red notices have been issued. Every airport in Europe has their photographs. Russian authorities have been informed that they're wanted for crimes in America. And you know what? Russia and America have an extradition treaty. So when they try to flee, they're going to get arrested at the border." Dimitri's face went pale. "How?" he whispered. "That was us. Me and my team. We didn't just take down your operation, Dmitri. We dismantled it. Every connection, every safe house, every account, everything. That's impossible. You don't have that kind of power." "I don't. But the federal government does. And they were very interested in your weapons trafficking. Very interested in making sure you never operate again." I walked away from him and didn't look back. That night, I received a message from Jocelyn at the IRS. Federal authorities had successfully extradited both of the assault perpetrators from their hideout in Eastern Europe. They were being transferred to New York for trial. The system had worked. Not because it was perfect, but because I'd learned how to work within it. The trial started on a cold November morning. The courtroom was packed. Media everywhere. Federal Judge Sarah Chun presiding. Prosecutor named Nathaniel Brooks, federal, sharp, had tried organized crime cases before. He knew what he was doing. I watched from the gallery as Dmitri was brought in. He looked smaller now. The detention center had hollowed him out. But his eyes were still cold, still calculating. The evidence presented was devastating. The recording, the financial transfers, the weapons inventory, the testimony from Marco, who'd turned state's evidence, the testimony from Ivy, who was now in witness protection and cooperating fully, the testimony from the two men who'd committed the assault. They'd made deals with prosecutors to testify against Dmitri in exchange for reduced sentences. It was methodical, professional, unassailable. On the 5th day of testimony, something unexpected happened. A lawyer I'd never seen before entered the courtroom. She was sharp, mid-50s, gray hair. Name was Daphne Rosewood. She handed documents to Judge Chun. The courtroom went silent as the judge read them. Her expression shifted from neutral to shocked. "Approach the bench," she said. Daphne, Nathaniel, and Julian Kress all approached. There was a whispered conversation I couldn't hear. Then Judge Chun called for a recess. During the break, Logan pulled me aside in the hallway. "Something's wrong," he said. "I heard one of the federal agents talking. Daphne Rosewood just filed a motion alleging that evidence against Dimitri was illegally obtained. That federal agents exceeded their authority. That the surveillance conducted on his penthouse violated his constitutional rights." My stomach went cold. Can she win? Maybe. If the judge agrees that the evidence was poisoned, everything falls apart. The entire case becomes inadmissible. How did she even know about the surveillance? That's what we need to figure out. When court reconvened, Judge Chun addressed the issue directly. "The defense has raised a substantial question regarding the legality of surveillance conducted at the defendant's residence," she said. "This court requires clarification on the chain of custody for this evidence and the specific authorization used to conduct this surveillance." Nathaniel stood up. "Your Honor, the surveillance was conducted by federal agents with proper authorization from the FBI field office." "I need documentation of that authorization," Judge Chun said. "Specific warrants. Specific justification." Here's where the trap sprung. The FBI field office couldn't produce the warrants because they hadn't been issued through normal channels. Logan, Tyler, Blake, and I had installed the surveillance equipment. We hadn't gotten warrants. We'd conducted illegal surveillance and then fed the information to Jocelyn, who'd used it to initiate a federal investigation. The moment that came out, everything we'd done would be exposed. And more importantly, everything the federal government had built on top of that evidence would become legally questionable. I felt the case slipping away. But then something extraordinary happened. Judge Chun called a private hearing. In her chambers. Just her, the lawyers, and me, as a material witness. The courtroom was cleared. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said to me. "And don't lie to me. I'll know." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I told her the truth. All of it. The infiltration of his penthouse. The unauthorized surveillance. How we'd fed it to Jocelyn. How the investigation had proceeded from there through legal channels. Judge Chun listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Why didn't you just go to the police?" she asked. "Because the police were compromised." "And you knew this?" "Yes." "How?" "Through my own investigation. Through sources that predate this case. Through intelligence that I can't publicly disclose." Judge Chun leaned back in her chair. "You violated federal law. You conducted surveillance without authorization. You broke into a private residence." "I did. And you did this to protect your daughter." "Yes." She looked at me with something I couldn't quite identify. Not approval, but understanding. The understanding of someone who'd seen the system fail enough times to know when the system needed to be pushed. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "The evidence you illegally obtained will remain inadmissible. The surveillance will be excluded from trial. However," she paused, "the federal investigation that proceeded from your evidence did generate independent evidence. Interview transcripts. Financial records obtained through proper legal channels by the IRS. Testimony from witnesses who came forward through legal means. That evidence is admissible because it was obtained legally. So the case survives?" I asked. "The case survives. But you don't. If anyone asks, you were never here. This conversation never happened. And you need to understand something, Mr. Marcus. If I find out you're involved in any further vigilante activities, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your life in federal prison. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear." "Good. Now get out of my chambers." The trial resumed. Without the surveillance evidence, the prosecution was weaker but still solid. The financial records, the witness testimony, the weapons inventory, it was enough. It took the jury 3 days to deliberate. On the 4th day, they came back with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Dmitri showed no emotion when the verdict was read, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Finally, he understood that he'd lost. As he was being led away, he looked directly at me in the gallery, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Real, genuine fear. Not fear of prison. Fear of knowing that he'd underestimated an enemy and that the cost had been everything. Judge Chen sentenced him to 25 years. No parole eligibility for 15. Outside the courthouse, Detective Henderson found me. "How did you know about the corruption?" she asked. "I didn't. Not at first. But when you started investigating, certain patterns emerged. Financial irregularities that pointed to outside influence. You knew before I did." "Maybe." She studied me for a long moment. "If you ever cross the line again, Marcus, I will arrest you myself. Regardless of the circumstances." "I know." "Good. Because what you did, it worked. But it could have destroyed everything. The case, the prosecution, the justice system. You got lucky." She walked away before I could respond. That night, I visited Jessica in the hospital. She was in the psychiatric ward, working through trauma with a specialized therapist. When she saw me, she cried. "He's going to prison," I told her. "For 25 years. The men who hurt you are going to prison. Your mother is going to prison. It's over." "Is it?" she asked. "Will it ever really be over?" I didn't have an answer for her. Because healing wasn't something that happened at sentencing. It was something that took years. Maybe a lifetime. But at least now, she could start. 6 months after Dimitri's conviction, I was still in federal prison. My 6-month sentence for the identity theft charges. It was surreal. I was in the same facility as the man I'd helped convict, but now I was a prisoner like him. The difference was, I had an exit date. He had 25 years. The warden knew who I was. Everyone in the facility knew who I was. The man who'd taken down the Russian mobster. The former SEAL who'd infiltrated the operation. I became something of a legend in there. Not a hero, but a cautionary tale. A reminder that sometimes the system worked, even when it had to be pushed. During my final month, I was called to a meeting with a federal prosecutor named Colin McKenzie. He was with the Department of Justice. Not local, federal. The kind of prosecutor who handled cases with national implications. "We have a problem," he said in a private room at the facility. "Dimitri's conviction is solid, but his reach is longer than we anticipated. We've discovered evidence that he has associates on the outside still operating, still trafficking weapons, still connected to hostile foreign governments. What do you need from me?" "Your cooperation. Official cooperation. You testify before a federal grand jury about what you know regarding his network, about his operations, about how extensive his reach was." I thought my involvement was supposed to remain confidential. It was. But now we're talking about national security. The weapons trafficking goes beyond organized crime. We have evidence suggesting that Dmitri was selling military-grade equipment to terrorist organizations, to hostile state actors. This is bigger than a single criminal case. I understood what he was asking. He wanted me to officially step out of the shadows, to put my name on the record, to make my involvement in the case public testimony. "If I do this," I said, "it changes everything. My daughter's case becomes national news. The illegal surveillance becomes public. Everything gets exposed." "Yes. And Judge Chun has agreed to grant you immunity for any illegal activities conducted in connection with the investigation. You won't be prosecuted for the surveillance, the break-in, the unauthorized investigation. In exchange, you testify." I thought about it. About Jessica. About what it would mean for her to have all of this exposed in federal court, on the record, permanently part of the public record. "I need to talk to my daughter first," I said. The following week, I was released from federal prison. Logan picked me up. We drove to where Jessica was staying, a quiet facility upstate where she was continuing her recovery. Derek was with her. They'd gotten married quietly, 6 months after the assault, with just family present. I asked to speak to Jessica alone. She looked better, stronger, still haunted, but healing. We sat on the porch of the facility, looking out over the grounds. The federal government wants me to testify, I told her. Officially. On the record. It means everything comes out. Your assault becomes part of a federal record. The investigation into me becomes public. Mom's crimes become public. All of it. Does it help put him away longer? Jessica asked. Maybe. It helps shut down his network. Saves other people from what happened to you. Jessica was quiet for a long time. Then do it, she said. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of pretending this didn't happen. If my story can help stop him from hurting anyone else, then it should be public. The grand jury testimony took place over 3 days in federal court. I detailed everything. The mission in Afghanistan. The interrogation of Dmitry in 2008. His escape and his years of planning revenge. The infiltration of his operation. The surveillance. The coordination with federal agents. All of it. Prosecutors presented evidence. Weapons. Financial records. Communications. Photographs of the operation. Everything that showed the scope of what Dmitry had built and the danger he represented. By the end, the grand jury had indicted not just Dmitry, but 14 of his associates. Network members across 3 states. Money launderers. Weapons dealers. Corrupt officials he'd paid off. The operation was being dismantled piece by piece. But there was one more element. One more layer that Colin McKenzie had been waiting to reveal. On the final day of testimony, he presented something that changed the entire narrative. Intelligence from the NSA. Signals intercepts. Communications between Dmitry and Russian intelligence officers. Not just organized crime. Actual state actors. The Russian government had been using Dmitry as an asset. Using his operation to move weapons to terrorist organizations. Using it as a way to destabilize American military supply chains. Dmitry wasn't just a criminal. He was a foreign intelligence asset. Which meant his conviction carried additional implications. It meant federal security agencies were now investigating every contact he'd made. Every transaction. Every communication. Every person who'd dealt with him. It meant his reach extended far beyond the criminal underworld. The courtroom went silent when this information was revealed. Journalists started texting immediately. News outlets were preparing major stories. Within hours, the case had transformed from a local crime story into a national security issue. Dmitry's lawyer filed appeal after appeal. But there was no getting around the facts. He'd been convicted in federal court. He'd been exposed as a foreign asset. He was going to spend 25 years in a federal prison, and when he got out, he'd face additional charges and deportation. Judge Chun approved my immunity agreement in a sealed proceeding. My illegal activities were protected. My involvement in the surveillance was legally shielded. But my name was now permanently attached to the case. Marcus Shaw, the man who'd brought down a Russian intelligence asset operating on American soil. Outside the courthouse after the final testimony, Colin McKenzie shook my hand. What you did? It matters, he said. You stopped a significant threat to national security. I did it to protect my daughter. I know. But sometimes, protecting your own family means protecting everyone else's family too. That night, I sat with Jessica and Derek. We didn't talk about the case. We talked about the future. About healing. About moving forward. Do you regret it? Jessica asked. Going outside the law. Breaking into his place. No, I said. Because it worked. Because you got justice. Because other people won't have to go through what you went through. Even though you could have been prosecuted. Even though. Derek squeezed Jessica's hand. He did what he had to do, he said. That's what fathers do. That's what warriors do. I looked at my daughter, the broken girl who'd survived something unspeakable and was slowly becoming whole again, and I understood that this was what victory actually looked like. Not revenge. Justice. Not vengeance. Healing. The system had worked. Not perfectly, but it had worked. 12 months after the federal grand jury testimony, everything I'd set in motion finally crashed down completely. Lauren's trial concluded first. She pled guilty to conspiracy, money laundering, and human trafficking. The prosecutor presented evidence of her financial transfers, her communications with Dmitry, her active role in coordinating the assault. She didn't fight it. Her lawyer negotiated a plea deal, 15 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 12. In the courtroom, she didn't look at me, didn't look at Jessica. She just looked down at the table while the judge read the sentence. 15 years. That would take her to her mid-60s. When she got out, she'd be a broken woman. She'd have nothing left. No family. No home. No future. I felt nothing watching her sentence being delivered. That surprised me. I thought there would be satisfaction, closure. Instead, there was just emptiness. Because destroying Lauren didn't heal Jessica. It didn't undo what happened. The two men who'd committed the assault, they received 12-year sentences in exchange for testifying against Dmitry. They'd be out in 8 with good behavior. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was what the system could deliver. The real collapse came when federal investigators, following Dmitry's network, discovered something massive. 3 federal agents, 2 prosecutors, 1 judge, all on Dmitry's payroll, all compromised. The investigation into the corruption inside the system went deeper than anyone anticipated. It turned out Dmitry had been methodically placing people for years. Some he'd recruited, some he'd blackmailed, some he'd simply paid off. Federal Bureau of Internal Affairs took over the investigation. The 3 agents were arrested. The prosecutors were arrested. The judge, a man named Oliver Hartwell, the same one I'd identified months earlier, was arrested in his home at 6 a.m. The perp walk was televised. Federal judges walked out of their houses in handcuffs. Prosecutors, federal agents. It was a national scandal. News outlets ran it for weeks. Federal system compromised by Russian intelligence asset. Dmitry Volkov's corruption network exposed. The headlines were relentless. And through it all, Dmitry sat in his cell and watched his empire collapse. But there was something else happening that wasn't public yet. Something that Colin McKenzie had discovered through the intelligence agencies. Dmitry had been planning to use his corrupted officials to get his conviction overturned. He'd had a timeline. He'd had a strategy. He'd been prepared to leverage his relationships with the 3 federal agents to suppress evidence, to pressure prosecutors, to find judges who would overturn his verdict on procedural grounds. It was a calculated, methodical plan that would have probably worked. Except we'd exposed him first. Except we'd dismantled his network before he could activate it. If I'd waited another 6 months, if I'd delayed, if I'd gone through normal channels, Dmitry would have walked free. The realization of how close we'd come to complete failure haunted me. 2 years after the initial assault, Jessica was finally ready to speak publicly about her experience. She did it in an interview with a major news network. She talked about the trauma, about the healing, about how the legal system had ultimately worked, but only because people had been willing to push it beyond its comfortable limits. She talked about me, about what I'd done, about how a father's love had been stronger than the system's failures. The interview went viral. Millions of views. Jessica became an advocate for trauma survivors. She started speaking at universities, writing articles, using her platform to help others who'd experienced similar horrors. And through it all, she never expressed hatred toward Dmitry. She expressed something more powerful. She expressed indifference. He no longer mattered in her life. He was just a man in a cell. He was irrelevant. That, more than any prison sentence, seemed to break him. Intelligence reports from federal prison indicated that Dmitry had become withdrawn, isolated. He'd lost his network. His money was frozen. His operation was dismantled. He had nothing left. No leverage. No allies. No future. 3 years after his conviction, he attempted suicide. Guards found him in time. He survived. But something inside him had died anyway. Derek and Jessica got pregnant. They had a son. They named him Marcus, after me, which I didn't deserve but accepted with gratitude. Watching my grandson born felt like healing. Like life continuing despite the darkness. Like the future reclaiming what the past had tried to destroy. Logan, Tyler, and Blake. The 3 SEAL brothers who'd helped me. They moved on with their lives. Logan got married to a woman he'd met in New York. Tyler opened a security consulting firm. Blake went back to his private investigation work. We stayed in touch, but we didn't talk about the operation. What happened in that darkness stayed in that darkness. Judge Chin retired 2 years after Dimitri's trial. I read her resignation letter. It didn't mention the case. But I understood. She'd bent rules that probably shouldn't be bent. She'd looked the other way at vigilante justice because she understood something fundamental. Sometimes the system needed to be pushed by people willing to step outside it. I never told her thank you. I never told her I knew what she'd done for me. But I thought about her often. I thought about how the law wasn't always just, but sometimes, when good people made difficult choices, it could approximate justice. Colin McKenzie called me one evening, 3 years after the federal grand jury testimony. I wanted you to know, he said. Dimitri's appeal was denied. His conviction stands. He's not getting out. Not through legal means anyway. The case is closed. Thank you for telling me. There's something else. We've been monitoring communications from Russian intelligence. Dimitri's no longer their asset. They've disowned him. They consider him a liability. He's alone now. Completely alone. After we hung up, I sat in my home office and thought about what that meant. Dimitri had spent 15 years planning revenge. 15 years plotting to destroy me. And in the end, he'd destroyed himself instead. He'd created a web so intricate that when it collapsed, it took him down with it. Jessica called that night. Dad, I wanted to tell you before you heard it from anyone else. Derek and I are moving to California. He got a job offer. We're going to start fresh. A new city. A new life. Away from all of this. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I wanted to thank you. For everything. For never giving up. For doing what needed to be done. For being a father. After we said goodbye, I stood in my yard and looked up at the stars. Somewhere in a federal prison, Dmitry Volkov was looking at the same stars through a small window, knowing he'd lost everything. And somewhere in California, my daughter was going to build a new life. A real life. A healing life. That was justice. That was victory. 5 years after Dimitri's conviction, I stood in the same cemetery where my parents were buried. Jessica was beside me with little Marcus, my grandson, now 4 years old. Derek was there too. We were placing flowers on a grave that hadn't existed when this nightmare started. It was Lauren's grave. She'd died in federal prison 2 years into her sentence. Heart attack. She was 58. The woman I'd married, built a life with, had been destroyed by her own choices. And now she was just a name on a headstone. Jessica placed flowers down and squeezed my hand. Do you forgive her? Little Marcus asked. The way kids do. Innocent, direct, without the weight adults carry. Jessica looked at me before answering. I forgive her, she said. Not because what she did was okay, but because holding on to anger was destroying me more than it was hurting her. That's when I understood what this entire journey had taught me. Justice wasn't about punishment. Justice was about healing. And healing only happened when you chose to let go of the poison you were drinking. I left the cemetery that day and drove to federal prison to visit Dimitri. The first time I'd seen him since his conviction. The guards brought him to the visitation room. He looked like a ghost. Hollow. Broken. Prison had aged him 20 years instead of 5. Why are you here? He asked. To tell you something, I said. My daughter is healing. She's writing a book about her experience. She's helping other survivors. She's building a life. You tried to destroy her, and you failed. Not because I saved her, but because she's stronger than what you did to her. Dimitri didn't respond. He just stared at the table. And me? I continued. I'm at peace. I found justice through the law. I worked within the system instead of outside it. That's the real victory. That's what you never understood. Why tell me this? Dimitri whispered. Because you need to know that you lost. Completely. Your revenge didn't break me. It broke you. I stood up to leave. But Dimitri spoke one more time. I'm sorry, he said. The words sounded strange coming from him. Foreign. Like he didn't know how to say them. I almost didn't respond. But I did. Because forgiveness, true forgiveness, Men accepting apologies even when they came too late. I believe you, I said. But sorry doesn't heal what you broke. It just means you finally understand what you've done. I walked out of that prison and never went back. Today, 5 years later, I'm writing this story down because I need people to understand something important. Justice isn't revenge. Revenge is poison. Revenge is a cycle that never ends. Justice, real justice, is walking away knowing that the system worked. Knowing that the law, even when it's flawed, can be pushed toward righteousness by people willing to believe in it. My daughter is alive. She's healing. She's stronger than she was before the trauma. That's not because I suffered. It's not because I made someone else suffer. It's because she chose healing over hatred. Detective Henderson retired last year. She called me before she left the force. Thank you, she said, for reminding me why I became a cop, for showing me that the system can work when people fight for it. Judge Chin died peacefully in her sleep 6 months ago. At her funeral, I thought about the choice she'd made to overlook my illegal surveillance. I thought about how sometimes justice required people to bend rules so that the rules could ultimately be upheld. Dimitri will spend the rest of his life in federal prison. He'll never hurt anyone again. Not because I killed him, but because the system, the imperfect, flawed, beautiful system, locked him away where he can't cause harm. And that's victory. That's real victory. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from? What country? What city? Drop it in the comments below. I want to know who you are. I want to connect with you. Because stories like this, they only matter if they reach people. If they inspire people. If they make people believe that justice is possible even when the odds seem impossible.